You know how accused child murderer David has been under investigation for months by authorities? Well, we just learned some key details about the secret grand jury proceedings that we're hearing evidence in this case, and the defense is about to get a hold of some very important information. I am going to explain what all of this means for the man accused of brutally killing a 14-year-old girl. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, we have an update in our David coverage that we need to talk about. We just got a big behind-the-scenes sneak peek at what the prosecutors in this case, the Los Angeles DA's office, has been up to in this case over the past year. And I think it's pretty significant. Now, I'm curious what exactly this is going to mean for David, for his case, if the defense gets a hold of this information. I know I'm being very vague right now, but there's a reason for it. I want to get into it. Let me explain. Let me put it into context. So David, of course, is the romantic homicide singer currently charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains, all in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Prosecutors allege that he was in a sexual relationship with her, that back on April 23, 2025, he allegedly lured her to his rental home in LA, stabbed her to death, allegedly watched her bleed out, and then reportedly took horrifying measures to conceal this alleged crime, all in an effort to keep her quiet about their relationship, to prevent her from coming forward and ruining his lucrative career. The special circumstances allegations in this case that carry heftier penalties, potentially the death penalty, murder of a witness, murder for financial gain, lying in wait. Prosecutors allege that he used a deadly and dangerous weapon, a sharp instrument, and prosecutors allege that he purchased all these things: a blue inflatable pool, chainsaws, a body bag, heavy-duty laundry bags, and that he dismembered her. He dismembered her body, that he made suspicious trips to the Santa Barbara County area, that he lied to friends and associates about the alleged smell of decomposition at his place. And we know that September 8th, 2025, that was the day after what would have been Celeste's 15th birthday, where her dismembered, decomposed body is found reportedly in the front trunk of a Tesla, allegedly registered to David at an LA tow yard. And at the tow yard, detectives apparently opened the Tesla's front storage compartment, find this black cadaver bag. It's covered in insects, and inside the bag, this is where they discover a severely decomposed head and torso. And then this plastic garbage bag, apparently beneath the black cadaver bag, is what contained the dismembered arms and legs. Horrifying. I'll also add that authorities say that Celeste's ring and pinky fingers on her left hand had reportedly been amputated, and neither was found in the Tesla. I say all this now to get to the development, the update. We know there is a preliminary hearing set for July 21st in this case. This is the opportunity for the prosecution to present what they hope is enough evidence for this case to move forward toward trial. It's a low standard. It's a probable cause standard. Kind of see the same thing playing out in the Tyler Robinson, Charlie Kirk case, right? Is there sufficient evidence? Is there probable cause to support the charges for this case to move forward? Now, one of the other reasons this is a big deal is that the prosecutors in LA didn't have to do this. They could have gone the route of a grand jury instead of a preliminary hearing. In other words, they could have had a grand jury indict or formally charge David of the crimes that he's now facing. And remember, a grand jury proceeding is a secret proceeding, usually no input from the defense. Preliminary hearing's different, right? It's public. The defense can present witnesses. They can cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses. They can make arguments. The defense is getting an opportunity to see the prosecution's strategy here. And it's still a question of why prosecutors didn't get a grand jury indictment in this case. Does it mean that there wasn't a grand jury? No, there were grand juries. In fact, there were reportedly multiple grand juries hearing evidence in this case. And perhaps they were investigative grand juries, right? Not in panel per se to get an indictment, but to present evidence, to subpoena witnesses, to get documents, to lock in testimony from witnesses and help the prosecutors lay out their case. Not necessarily to indict, not necessarily to formally charge. Strategy there. Well, guess what? I go to my update. We just found out that there was grand jury testimony on 7 different occasions. According to TMZ, a judge has agreed to unseal transcripts of grand jury testimony. Now, we're going to talk about what this can mean a little later, but we have the dates, what they're looking at now. November 17th to the 21st, 2025, December 4th to the 5th, 2025, December 8th to the 10th, 2025, February 4th to the 6th, 2026, February 9th to the 11th, 2026, February 20th, 2026, and February 23rd. 2026. So this is really the first time that we got a sense of how many times, at least, grand juries met, for how long, on which days. Now, I want to put those dates into the timeline here because you look at those dates, and I'm trying to put two and two together, right? So we know that September 8th is when Celeste's body was reportedly found in the Tesla, okay? But now you're looking at those November grand jury dates. November 2025, that was when it was reported that David was no longer cooperating with the investigation. We know November 21st, 2025 is when the court orders that the LAPD medical examiner's report and information on Celeste's death be sealed, that a security hold is placed to prevent any information from reaching the media. Interesting. We're going to talk about that. Look, before we jump back into this, running a business is tough enough. Why make it harder doing things manually or relying on dozens of apps that don't really talk to each other, right? Well, that's where our sponsor, Odoo, comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management platform with a full suite of integrated apps that seamlessly connect all your operations, from sales and accounting to manufacturing, even shipping. Odoo can automatically generate these professional, sleek-looking sales orders, invoices, and vendor bills, and it can automatically assign sales teams and send email updates through each sales stage, and even use AI to pull reports that help with your decision making. For manufacturing, their apps can sync inventory with real-time production and purchase updates so you can never run out of stock. And when it comes time for accounting, that's also fully automated. Odoo can create invoices, track expenses, and even summarize data with AI to save you hundreds of hours. You know what the best part is? You can choose your apps and even build custom workflows so it's all fully tailored to your business's needs. Look, take your business to the next level by consulting with an Odoo expert today for free at odoo.com/sidebar. Those December grand jury dates, what do we know? Well, first of all, I remember that's when we first started hearing rumblings about a grand jury, by the way. But more specifically, December 9th, 2025, that is when Celeste's medical examination was reportedly completed. But it wouldn't be publicly released until after David's arrest. But that date's key. By the way, just going to that report, you read verbatim from the summary portion. It says in part, quote, autopsy examination was limited by extensive post-mortem changes. There are 2 penetrating wounds of the torso with smooth edges that may represent sharp force injuries. The wound on the upper abdomen penetrates the liver, and the wound on the left chest penetrates one of the left intercostal spaces with disruption of the adjacent ribs' cortical surfaces. The left lung appears intact. The bilateral upper and lower extremities show full thickness dismemberment. Multiple other skin and soft tissue defects are present without apparent associated internal injuries. The etiology of these defects is not clearly apparent due to severe post-mortem changes. Post-mortem toxicology performed on liver tissue shows the presence of a low level of ethanol, which may be due to post-mortem changes or ingestion and does not appear to be contributory to the cause of death. Given the history and circumstances as currently known by me in the setting of the findings by examination, ancillary studies, and in the absence of other definitive causes of death, the cause of death is multiple penetrating injuries. The manner of death is classified as homicide. Let's talk about the February dates, okay? So January 22nd, 2026, we know David's purported friend Neil Langston was arrested in Montana, allegedly at his mom's house, reportedly for failing to appear as a witness. It was reported that the local PD assisted the LAPD in this. February 4th, 2026, that's one of the key dates, right? TMZ reports that Langston appears in a Los Angeles courtroom, reportedly to testify before a grand jury, but only for 30 to 40 minutes. Raised a lot of questions that if that's true, what did he testify to? Was he granted immunity? Did he plead the fifth against self-incrimination? We know February 2026 also was a key month because that's when David's father, mother, brother had challenged subpoenas requiring them to travel to LA and testify, but a Texas court denied their petition. And notably, at a court hearing, Bennett Dodson, assistant DA for Waller County, told the court, "Don't think it's a secret to anyone at this point that Mr. David Burke is a musician who is quite famous, and this matter concerns a car that was registered to him at these witnesses' address here in Houston that had a dismembered, decomposing body in it. I would say if a car with a dismembered, decomposing body is registered to your home address, that is something you should expect to be questioned by the authorities about, and that's what this is, Judge." And we learn from these filings that there is, in fact, a murder investigation into Celeste's death and that David is the target. So now we have a better sense of the significance of these grand jury dates. The reason I even found out about this, before we even talked about what TMZ was reporting, Steve Fisher, the private investigator hired by the owner of the Hollywood Hills property where David was purportedly staying, near where the Tesla was found. He'd been looking into this case for months. I saw his post on X. This is what alerted me to it. He posted on X, quote, "A motion filed in the David case reveals that the investigative grand jury met on 17 separate days. We are now only 10 days away from the preliminary hearing, and I look forward to hearing the witness testimony. We are also 10 days away from David understanding he will never experience freedom again for as long as he lives. At the status conference, the prosecutor said the preliminary hearing is expected to last no more than 3 days. That means the prosecution will likely call only the witnesses and present only the evidence needed to establish probable cause, perhaps with a little extra to show David Burke the strength of the case against him. I am particularly interested in whether anyone from David's management team or Neo will testify. I have no information indicating whether they will be called to the preliminary hearing or held for a possible trial. My personal opinion is that this case will not ultimately go to trial. I believe he will accept a plea shortly before the scheduled trial date, preventing many of the most gruesome details from ever being disclosed publicly. Hashtag Celeste Rivas Hernandez." Okay, so I have a lot of questions with this, and luckily I'm not just going to be talking to myself in the ether for the next 30 minutes. No, I want to bring on John Day, criminal defense attorney, to talk about this. John, so good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, are you surprised by how many times the grand jury met? I mean, is it common for them or several grand juries to meet for that many times over the course of several months? And I'm still not 100% if it was one grand jury or several grand juries, but when you see that amount of dates and that amount of times, is that surprising?
So not surprising if you accept the idea that this is an investigative grand jury, that they are calling in witnesses that the prosecution wants to lock in their testimony. Maybe these are reluctant witnesses. Maybe they've got to go outside the state to get them, but they're building the case for the prosecution, and they're doing it sort of step by step. You know, they're not taking it right to a preliminary hearing. That's coming later. And they could have indicted with one grand jury, but what they're doing is using the grand jury as an investigative tool. So in that context, it's not surprising to have multiple sessions, multiple meetings. You've probably got multiple witnesses coming in, dealing with the forensics, the medical examiner, all that kind of stuff. So not surprising in the context of building the investigative case.
To be clear, you, me, the public, the media, we will never see those grand jury transcripts, right? Or
yeah,
maybe,
we won't see them unless for some reason
trial?
something is attached to a pleading that's filed in the court, or sections come up. But what the prosecution has is a prior statement under oath by these witnesses. Of course, that cuts both ways for the defense too, because you've got potential impeachment material. But the prosecutors have decided they've got to use the grand jury to do their investigative work for them, lock in these statements, lock in these witnesses.
Why is this beneficial to the defense? Now that the defense is going to get these grand jury transcripts from all of these days, and again, I say at least, I don't know if there was other days of grand jury testimony. We'll talk about the specific dates. I mentioned it before. But now that they're going to potentially get the transcripts from these specific dates, why does the defense
2 bites
want them?
of the apple?
What are they going to do with them? How is it
Statements
going to help
under
their
oath
case?
in a grand jury by witnesses for the prosecution, and the defense is going to track them. If they testify, if these witnesses testify differently at a preliminary hearing, at a trial, the defense has prior statements that they can use to challenge them, to impeach them. So for the defense, it's certainly helpful, because if the witnesses deviate even slightly from what they've said, defense is going to pounce on it. So while there is a benefit to the prosecution, the defense is going to get all the witness transcripts. The defense is going to get to pore over them. And by the way, the defense is also getting to see the prosecution's strategy, their theories early on. So there is a benefit for the defense, rather than going, say, right into a prelim or just going right to the grand jury. The defense is watching the prosecutors build their case, and they're going to be able to use those building blocks if and when any of the witnesses differ or stray from the line.
You said if and when, meaning there's probably going to be more people that testified in a grand jury than are going to testify at the preliminary hearing, right? I mean, do you imagine, I mentioned what Steve Fisher said before, but do you imagine that the prosecution is going to be rather limited in who they present in their preliminary hearing? And let's say there was, 15 witnesses that testified in grand jury, you might have 5 that testified in preliminary. So like in a way, yeah, the defense is getting ready. Maybe they're getting ready to challenge these witnesses at a preliminary hearing, but there might not be everybody testifying at this prelim.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, because the prosecution doesn't have to put on its whole case. This is
Right.
the probable cause standard. It's low. They just got to get over that little bar of probable cause. You don't want to put on all your witnesses, but you've got to do just enough so that the judge who's presiding, sitting on the bench, can say, okay, you've established probable cause. And it also telegraphs a lot, not only to the defense, but also to the public. Remember, the prosecutors have to answer to the public, which is looking for answers in this case. And so prosecutors want to show, look, this is what we've done. This is what we've got. They don't have to put on everybody, but they just have to put on enough in a bare bones case that a judge will find probable cause.
Is there a chance defense looks at these grand jury transcripts and makes an argument that I've seen happen in other cases before and says, you know what? You misrepresented facts to the grand jury, prosecutors. You know what? You left out exculpatory information, exculpatory evidence, evidence tending to negate the defendant's guilt. And because of that, because of your shenanigans in the grand jury, these charges should be thrown out. Although, no, right? Because there wasn't a grand jury indictment. So I don't know. You tell me, is there anything they could use that to try to get this whole case thrown out?
Well, no, you're right. There wasn't an indictment. There hasn't been a grand jury indictment. Normally, if there was some prosecutorial misconduct or somehow the testimony was tainted, you'd use that to try to challenge the grand jury indictment. No such indictment here, but they do get these statements under oath, which theoretically could be a gold mine for impeachment, for cross-examination down the road. So not a bad thing if you're the defense on this case, but the prosecution wants to lock in witnesses, especially if they are if they're squirrely, if there's some question about their testimony. They want to lock them in. They want to know what the stories are ahead of time. But it's not going to get thrown out on a challenge to the indictment because, as you say, there's not an indictment yet.
Just to be clear also, is there a possibility they could get information that they asked the grand jury to return the indictment and the grand jury said no? I mean, would that come up in any of this material that they're getting from the grand jury?
Yeah, I mean, that does happen where grand juries decline to indict. They decline to issue a true bill. It's a blow to the prosecutors because, the expression is a prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. And we've all sort of understood that if you watch the world of criminal law. But in this particular case, they're not going to let that happen. If for some reason they try to get an indictment and the jury kicks it back, I just don't see that happening. This is really the investigative grand jury, even if they've had to bring in 2 or 3 different panels because, the timing of when these sessions expire, when the juror's time is up. But at the end of the day, they're trying to build the case. There is a benefit to the defense, but the prosecution now knows they're going into this prelim. Remember, the prelim is a mini trial. A judge is presiding. There's cross-examination of the state's witnesses, of the prosecution's witnesses by the defense. So, a lot's going to come out. And, and especially in a high-profile trial, a prelim like this certainly benefits the DA's office, and I think they would say it benefits the public because you get to see transparently what's going on in the case. There's no secret indictment.
So I want to get a little more specific about these dates, and I talked about it before, but I want your opinion, your expertise on it. First things first, though, I talk about the November date for the grand jury. It is possible, right? It is possible there was a grand jury or grand jury testimony or grand jury proceeding before those specific November dates, right? Just because they're asking for the transcript from these specific dates. I mean, theoretically, it could be possible there was something that happened before that, maybe in October, maybe even, is it possible?
Oh, yeah, it's possible. And we will eventually, one way or the other, I think, find out the actual timeline, the actual chronology. But remember what's happening if you're the prosecutor. You are locking in all sorts of testimony, the investigative stuff, the forensic stuff. It's really interesting that the timing with the medical examiner report coming, the fact that you've got
let's talk about that. So November is interesting, right? I mentioned this before. Interesting time frame. Again, that's when we believe David reportedly was no longer cooperating. And there is a security hold on the ME's office. All that's happening, and you got the November grand jury dates. Where does your mind go?
Right. Well, the lack of cooperation, that's, it's not unexpected that his counsel are like, shut up. but also the fact that you've got forensic stuff coming in. That certainly takes some time. So you've got reports from the MA, you've got other investigative, forensic, physical evidence reports. Who knows what's going on with witnesses that they're having to bring in elsewhere who might not be cooperating. But also the lockdown on the information, what does that tell us? They don't want anyone to know the facts that only the killer would have known. So they've got to lock that down. They want to make sure that there's nothing publicly released that a potential defense attorney would say, okay, this is something that only the killer knows, but we've got to make sure that we can defend against it. Prosecutors want to make sure that nothing gets out forensically that somehow leaks into the air and that a potential defense team gets hold of.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, so December, right, those December dates that we talked about at the grand jury, I mentioned this before, the medical exam is finished, right? And I wonder now, how was that potentially presented to the grand jury? Did the ME testify? I mean, is that something we should be thinking about?
Yeah, and it looks like they were kind of coincidentally happening. It looks like they probably hadn't even finished everything until, maybe early December, but they're getting ready to present it. But yeah, they're going to have the key medical examiner personnel testifying. And again, that's one thing to anticipate at the preliminary hearing is what that medical examiner testimony is going to look like, because that's going to be key to the future of this case. But this is what's been building up into the grand jury presentation. They probably were contemporaneously getting that information together. And so that lands in December. And now, here in July, we're going to have the result, the public airing of what the medical examiner's investigation shows. It's going to be key.
February, I think, is the most interesting month, if you ask me, because as I said, Neil Langston gets arrested. He's purportedly brought back to LA, seemingly at the courthouse, right? They believe he testified at the grand jury for about 30 to 40 minutes. At the same time, we know that David's family is reportedly being subpoenaed to come testify. I think February is probably the most telling of all months. Am I wrong on that? I mean, what do you think? It seems likely this Leo testified, right? It seems likely, I would have to imagine, that his family testified too. Or, I mean, isn't that what's going on?
Yeah, and that is why February is certainly key. And it's interesting because of the bringing the guy back from Montana. I think one of three things could have happened. One, he takes the fifth, all right? He invokes his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself. Two, he lays some kind of foundational testimony, but for whatever reason, they don't go beyond 30 or 40 minutes. And then three, the third possibility, I think, is that there's some kind of immunity deal that gets launched right about then. And for whatever reason, his testimony is limited, but the prosecutors have worked some kind of a deal with him and his lawyers to get testimony, and that he basically gets to walk on any potential accessory charges or after the fact charges or anything like that. So I think it's one of those three things. Who knows? 30 to 40 minutes is not a lot of time, not a lot of information to get out, but it's very likely it's one of those, could have been taking the Fifth Amendment, invoking his Fifth Amendment right.
To be clear, right, investigators, prosecutors, they haven't indicated that anyone other than David is responsible for these alleged crimes. It does make you wonder, did Neil Langston see something, hear something, know about something? Is that what's going on? I mean, I really don't know. And I also have to say about the family, my 2 cents on the family is, I wonder if they're being called to make that connection between the Tesla, right, where Celeste's body was reportedly found, and linking it to it being registered to David out in Texas, right? Again, I don't know, but unless they allegedly know something about Celeste, I don't know, maybe about their relationship too, their purported relationship, because that's a key factor in this case too. What do you think the family's role is in this?
I think it's foundational stuff. I think you're right. It's what do they know about the relationship? What are the interconnections there? Because remember, the defense seems to be focusing now entirely on causation. I mean, this is going to be, the prosecution has to prove he did it. It's not just some after the fact disposing of a body, the inappropriate disposing of a body, something like that. Everything seems to be pointing to causation. So the family is called to testify to try to fill in some of the gaps with the relationship, any kind of information that they got ahead of time, before the murder, after the murder. But when all these arrows point to the defense saying, look, you got to prove causation and you still haven't done it yet, right? It's a horrifying set of facts coming out of the medical examiner. But the family, any other witness like that, is establishing or filling the holes, filling the gaps that the prosecution has to try to build these blocks.
Yeah, I personally believe the defense, because they've said this too, right? Like, but I think they're really going to challenge cause of death. I think they're really going to challenge the circumstances of what happened at that property time frame. That's where I think they may go, but we'll see. John, before I let you go, I'd be remiss if I just didn't ask your opinion on this other big update in this case. I don't think I've spoken to an attorney about it, but I think it's interesting. So we reported it last week. NBC News reported that more than a dozen employees of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office are under investigation for allegedly accessing law enforcement investigation files without proper authorization. And there is a belief that this is specifically about Celeste, about her death. And we know that there was an unfortunate aspect about this where there was the premature release of details about her death before the autopsy report was even published. And NBC had reported that it may have been the Celeste case that prompted this probe by the Human Resources Department. You tell me your thoughts on this and how it could potentially affect the David case.
Right. It's a PR problem for the prosecution. It's an HR problem for the medical examiner. It's not an evidentiary problem. I mean, it's not going to have an effect. Of course, the defense may want to use this to argue change of venue. Big profile cases in LA do not get changed on venue challenges. Yeah, they've got to deal with it. It's unfortunate for the medical examiner. It's unfortunate for the prosecution, but it doesn't have any direct effect on the evidence.
Let me challenge you. Couldn't they say, I mean, the defense, I don't know if they would say this, but like, wow, what a sloppy office you're running over there. My gosh, if they're releasing premature details, how can we be 100% sure you guys know what you're talking about with respect to the autopsy?
Oh, I'd do it. Yeah, that's the card I would play. But I think at the end of the day, does it actually affect the chain of custody? Does it actually affect the findings? If they want to raise questions about it, sure. I mean, that's what you got to try if you're the defense team. But in the big picture, I think it's more of it's a PR problem that the prosecution has to manage. At the end of the day, is it going to have a direct effect? Of course, it's certainly a possibility. I just think it's unlikely.
John, have I mentioned how much I enjoy having you on here on Sidebar? If I haven't, I'm saying it to you again. I really, really appreciate your expertise on this because it is a little bit of a complicated situation we're dealing here, and I wanted to put it into perspective because, people just look at it and say, oh, grand jury dates. There's really important things going on here, and thank you so much for illuminating it and teaching our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always good to see you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.